Zethkara pressed her scaled finger against the trigger guard of her plasma rifle. The weapon felt warm in her claws after the battle. Smoke rose from what used to be a human settlement on the planet's surface. The air smelled of burnt metal, and something else she could not name. The Vexai moved around her like black shadows with too many legs. Their shells caught the light from the burning buildings, made clicking sounds with their mouths that meant they were happy about winning. Zethkara had learned their simple language during the 3 months. They'd been fighting together. She walked through the destroyed human base. Boots crunched on broken glass and twisted metal. The humans had built their walls from strange materials. She saw pieces of farming machines welded to steel plates. Old furniture had been stacked to make barriers. Even broken vehicles had been pushed into defensive lines. "These creatures are weak," said Vexthau, the drone commander. Its voice sounded like grinding gears. "They cannot fight properly. They use tools meant for growing food to make weapons." Zethkara nodded, but something bothered her. She knelt beside a fallen human soldier. The man wore simple clothes under basic armor. His weapon was crude compared to her plasma rifle, yet he had died holding a position that made no tactical sense. The blast marks on the wall behind him showed he had kept firing even when enemy forces surrounded him. "Why did they not retreat?" she asked. Vexel's compound eyes turned toward her. Each eye was like a black pearl. Humans are not intelligent. They do not think as a group. Each one acts alone. This makes them stupid in war. But Zethkara had studied the battle recordings. The humans had somehow coordinated their defense without any visible command structure. They had no hive mind like the Vexai. They had no honor codes like her own Sorok people. Yet they had managed to delay the attack for 6 hours longer than expected. She examined their improvised weapons more closely. A mining laser had been converted into an anti-aircraft gun. The modification was crude but effective. It had destroyed 2 of their dropships before being silenced. The humans had used agricultural drones as scouts, painting targets for their limited artillery. "Look at this construction," she said, pointing to a barricade. They welded a tractor to a concrete wall, then they mounted weapons on top. It's required engineering knowledge. "Desperate animals will try anything," Vextal replied. "It means nothing." Zethkara walked to what had been the humans' command center. The building was small and simple. Maps covered the walls, showing the local area. She could see marks where the humans had planned their defense. They had identified every possible attack route. They had prepared fallback positions. They had even planned evacuation routes for civilians. The strange thing was how long they had held each position. According to Sorok's military doctrine, a defender should abandon a position when it became untenable. The Vexai would simply relocate their forces through collective decision-making. But these humans had fought for every meter of ground. As if each piece of dirt was precious, she found the body of what appeared to be the human commander. The woman wore no special uniform or rank insignia, yet the defensive position suggested sophisticated tactical thinking. How had she coordinated her forces without the communication networks the Vexai used? Commander Zethkata called one of her own soldiers. "We have found something unusual." She followed him to a partially collapsed bunker. Inside, they discovered a medical station. The humans had continued treating wounded soldiers and civilians even during the final assault. Medical supplies were scattered everywhere, but she could see they had been used until the very end. "They wasted resources on those who could not fight," observed her soldier, Krexmar. "This shows weakness." But Zethkara noticed something else. The medical station had been positioned in the most protected part of the bunker. The humans had prioritized protecting their healers and wounded over storing weapons or ammunition. This suggested a completely different way of thinking about warfare. She picked up a simple communication device from the floor. It was basic technology, barely better than what her people had used centuries ago. Yet somehow the humans had used these primitive radios to coordinate a defense that had surprised both the Sorok and Vexai military analysts. Outside, the Vexai were already processing the battlefield. They collected human technology for analysis. They gathered biological samples for their research laboratories. They worked with mechanical efficiency. showing no interest in understanding why their enemies had fought so desperately. Zethkara watched them work. The Vexi collective mind made them perfect soldiers in many ways. They never hesitated, never questioned orders, never felt fear or doubt. Each drone was expendable in service to the whole. This made them brutally effective in combat. Her own people, the Sarok, fought for honor and clan loyalty. They followed ancient codes of warfare that emphasized courage and individual glory. A Sarrak warrior would die before showing cowardice, but they would also recognize when a battle was lost and retreat to fight another day. But these humans seemed to follow neither model. They had no hive mind to coordinate their actions. They had no ancient warrior codes to guide their behavior, yet they had fought with a desperation and creativity that neither species could fully explain. She examined the blast patterns around the human positions again. The evidence showed that some humans had continued fighting even after their weapons ran out of ammunition. They had used tools, rocks, even their bare hands against enemies with advanced technology. This was not tactical thinking. This was something else entirely. The next target is ready for assault, Vexel announced. Intelligence indicates another small human colony. Resistance should be minimal. Zethkara loaded her equipment onto the transport ship. As they lifted off from the smoking ruins, she looked down at the destroyed settlement one more time. Something about this victory felt incomplete. The humans had lost, but they had made the Alliance pay a higher price than expected. During the flight to their next objective, she reviewed the tactical data from the battle. The humans had inflicted more casualties than their equipment and training should have allowed. They had delayed the assault longer than any computer model had predicted. It had shown capabilities that did not match their apparent technological level. Most disturbing was their refusal to surrender. Every military doctrine she knew included provisions for honorable surrender when defeat became inevitable. Now the Vexi would simply reassess and redeploy. The Sarok would yield to a superior opponent rather than waste lives meaninglessly. But these humans had fought until the last soldier fell. They had protected their wounded and civilians even when it weakened their defensive capabilities. Had used weapons and tactics that violated every principle of efficient warfare. As their ship approached the next human settlement, Zethkara felt an unfamiliar sensation. For the first time in her military career, she was uncertain about the outcome of a battle against supposedly inferior opponents. The ease of their previous victory no longer felt like evidence of human weakness. Instead, it felt like a warning. The attack came before dawn, but not from where they expected. Zethkara had positioned her forces around the human settlement called Riverside Colony, following standard military tactics. The Vexi drones had surrounded the perimeter while Sarok warriors prepared for a frontal assault. Everything should have been simple and quick. Instead, the sky filled with small flying machines that buzzed like angry insects. At first, Zethkara thought they were some kind of military drone. Then she realized these were farming machines, the kind humans used to spray crops and monitor their fields. But now, they carried crude bombs, made from mining explosives. The little machines dove at their positions like suicide attackers. Each explosion was small, but there were dozens of them. The Vexi tried to shoot them down, but the drones moved in unpredictable patterns. They seemed to have no central control, yet they coordinated their attacks perfectly. "This is impossible," growled Commander Thuckmer through the communication system. "How are they controlling so many units without a command network?" Before Zethkara could answer, the ground beneath her feet exploded. The humans had buried mining charges throughout the area, turning the entire battlefield into a trap. The explosions came in waves, each one timed to cause maximum damage to their advancing forces. Through the smoke and chaos, she saw human vehicles approaching. These were not military machines. They were civilian trucks and farm equipment, covered with metal plates welded on in rough patterns. The armor looked crude, but it was effective enough to deflect their light weapons. The strangest part was how the humans fought. They had no visible command structure. No radio chatter filled the airwaves. No central authority seemed to be giving orders. Yet somehow, their scattered units worked together like parts of a single organism. A group of human soldiers attacked her position from the left, while another group flanked from the right. At the same time, their improvised vehicles created a diversion at the front. The timing was perfect, but she could not understand how they had coordinated such a complex maneuver. "They are using primitive communication methods," reported Vexlaw. "We detect children moving between positions carrying messages." Zethkara focused her optical enhancers on the human lines. Sure enough, young humans were running between different groups of fighters. They moved with incredible speed and skill, dodging weapons fire and navigating through the battlefield like they had been born to it. "Those are non-combatants," said Commander Thekmer, with disgust in his voice. "What kind of species uses their offspring as military assets? No honorable warrior would endanger children in battle." But Zethkara watched one of those children slip past 3 Vex-High drones without being detected. The young human carried a message to a group of fighters who immediately changed their tactics. Within minutes, they had repositioned their forces to exploit a weakness in the alien defensive line. The tactical implications were disturbing. The humans were using their young not as soldiers, but as a communication network that was almost impossible to intercept or jam. The children knew the local terrain perfectly. They could move through areas that adult fighters could not access. They provided a coordination system that worked even when electronic communications failed. A massive explosion rocked the battlefield as human. Demolition charges destroyed one of their supply depots. The timing suggested they had been watching and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. But how had they known when to detonate the charges without any visible coordination? Zethkara began to realize they were fighting an enemy that operated on completely different principles. The Vexi collective consciousness allowed instant communication between all units. Sorok military doctrine relied on clear command hierarchies and honor codes. But humans seemed to fight through individual initiative guided by some kind of shared understanding. During the 3rd hour of combat, something unprecedented happened. Commander Thokmar gave the order to withdraw. In her entire military career, Zethkara had never retreated from an engagement with a technologically inferior opponent. The shame of it burned in her chest like acid. As they pulled back from their positions, she witnessed something that would stay with her forever. A human soldier had been hit by plasma fire and was clearly dying. Instead of seeking medical attention or trying to escape, he dragged himself to a makeshift medical station where other wounded humans were being treated. The soldier used his own body to shield the medical area from incoming fire. He was too weak to hold a weapon, too injured to fight, but he positioned himself as a human barrier between the medics and their attackers. Zethkara watched through her scope as the man died, still protecting others with his final breath. This made no tactical sense. The soldier gained nothing from this action. His death would not advance any military objective. He was not following orders from a hive mind or fulfilling some ancient honor code. He had simply chosen to sacrifice himself for strangers. The retreat continued through the afternoon. Human forces harassed them with hit-and-run attacks, using their knowledge of local terrain to maximum advantage. They struck from unexpected angles, disappeared before counterattacks could be organized, and reappeared in completely different locations. During one of these skirmishes, they managed to capture the human commander. Captain Jake Miller was a middle-aged man with graying hair and tired eyes. He wore no special uniform or insignia that marked him as a leader. Yet the tactical sophistication of the human defense suggested he possessed considerable military skill. As Vexi drones dragged him toward their transport ship, Miller's eyes met Zethkara's gaze. She expected to see fear or anger or hatred. Instead, his expression seemed almost sad, like he felt sorry for her. The look lasted only a moment, but it left her deeply unsettled. "Interrogate him thoroughly," ordered Commander Thokmar. "We must understand how they achieved this level of coordination without proper command structures." But Zethkara found herself wondering if they were asking the wrong questions. Maybe the humans had not achieved coordination despite their lack of hive minds or honor codes. Maybe they had achieved something entirely different. Something that neither the Vex-High or the Sarok could fully comprehend. As their forces regrouped at a safe distance from the human settlement, reviewed the tactical recordings from the battle. The humans had inflicted severe casualties while suffering relatively few losses themselves. They'd used inferior technology to defeat superior forces through creativity. adaptability, and sheer determination. Most disturbing was their apparent disregard for conventional military wisdom. They had committed their reserves at the worst possible moment and somehow turned it into an advantage. They had divided their forces in the face of a larger enemy and used it to create tactical flexibility. They had ignored every rule of warfare she had ever learned, and it had worked. The captured human commander was taken to the Vex High interrogation facility. Zethkara watched the transport ship disappear into the evening sky, carrying with it the only person who might be able to explain what they had just experienced. For the first time in her career, she was afraid of facing human forces again. The Vex High interrogation chamber smelled of metal and something sweet that made Zethkara's stomach turn. Captain Miller sat strapped to a chair made of black material that seemed to move on its own. Thin wires connected to his temples pulsed. With dim light, the Vex High had been questioning him for 2 days without learning anything useful. The subject resists standard neural probing, reported interrogator Vexanine, its mandibles clicking in frustration. His mind does not process information in predictable patterns. Each question produces different emotional responses that mask the factual content. Zethkara watched through the observation window as Miller endured another round of questioning. The human showed signs of pain and exhaustion, but his eyes remained alert. When the Vex High asked about military positions, he would think about something completely unrelated. When they demanded tactical information, his mind would drift too. Memories of food or music or people. "Let me try," she said, entering the chamber. The Vex High interrogator stepped back with obvious reluctance. This creature's thoughts are chaotic. Trying to communicate with it directly is inefficient. Zethkara had been studying human behavior. Since their first encounter, she had noticed patterns that the Vex High collective mind could not process. She pulled up a chair and sat across from Miller, keeping her weapon holstered. "Why do you fight?" she asked in simple terms. Miller raised his head slowly. Blood had dried on his face from a cut above his left eye. Despite his injuries, he managed a weak smile. "You really want to know the answer to that question? Your military tactics make no sense to me," she admitted. "In the last battle, you sacrificed good defensive positions to save individual soldiers. You used valuable resources to protect people who could not fight. Your entire approach to warfare seems like organized chaos." Miller's smile grew wider. "You're looking at this the wrong way. Do not fight for military doctrine or battlefield. Efficiency. We fight for specific people and specific reasons. Tom has a daughter who just learned to walk last month. Lisa has a mother who makes the best apple pie in 3-star systems. We fight for the right to be wrong sometimes, to be inefficient. When we choose to make our own mistakes, instead of following perfect orders." The concept confused Zethkara completely. Her own people, the Sarok, fought for honor and social standing within their clans. Victory brought respect and better positions in their warrior hierarchy. The Vex High fought because their collective consciousness determined it was necessary for the survival and expansion of their species. But humans seemed to fight for things that did not exist in any physical sense. Emotions, relationships, abstract concepts like freedom and choice. These were not tactical advantages or survival mechanisms. They were something else entirely. "Your people will be absorbed into the Vex High collective or eliminated as a threat," she stated as a simple fact. "The galaxy has no room for chaos and inefficiency. Organized species with clear purposes always defeat disorganized ones." Miller considered this for a long moment. "Maybe you were right," he said finally. "But if we go down, we will make it interesting. We will surprise you. We will do things that your tactical computers cannot predict. And maybe, just maybe, we will find a way to win that nobody thought was possible." Before Zethkara could respond, alarms began sounding throughout the facility. Emergency lights flashed red as the ship's defensive systems activated. Through the chamber's small window, she could see explosions blooming in the darkness of space. "Attack. Formation detected," announced the ship's computer system. "Multiple small craft approaching from asteroid field. Trajectory analysis indicates suicide attack pattern." But Zethkara recognized those ships. They were human civilian vessels, modified with weapons and armor. The same kind of improvised fighting machines they had encountered at Riverside Colony. The humans had somehow found their interrogation facility and launched a rescue mission. battle that followed defied every rule of space combat she had ever learned. The human ships flew through the asteroid field at speeds that should have resulted in immediate destruction. They used the floating rocks as cover and launching points, bouncing between asteroids like children playing a dangerous game. It's impossible. Navigation detected, reported the tactical officer. No computer system can calculate those flight paths in real time. The pilots must be using pure intuition. Szeth Kara watched the human ships coordinate their attack without any visible communication system. Each vessel acted independently, yet their movements formed a complex pattern that gradually overwhelmed the facility's defenses. It was like watching a dance performed by partners who had never practiced together but somehow knew all the same steps. The humans used explosives that should not have worked in space. They combined different types of weapons in ways that created unexpected effects. Most remarkably, they adapted their tactics constantly throughout the battle, changing their approach every time the defenders found a counter-strategy. They have modified their plan 17 times in the past hour, observed Vexanine, with something that might have been admiration. Each modification responds to our defensive adjustments. This level of tactical flexibility should require a hive mind intelligence. But Miller had explained it already. Humans did not fight like a hive mind or according to rigid doctrine. They fought as individuals who somehow shared a common purpose. Each pilot made independent decisions that contributed to a larger goal none of them could see completely. During the final phase of the battle, human cutting beams sliced through the interrogation chamber's door. Miller's restraints dissolved under the focused energy. He stood up slowly, rubbing his wrists where the bonds had held him. A human soldier in makeshift armor entered the chamber, weapon ready, but Miller held up his hand to stop any violence. "For not stopping them," he said to Szeth Kara, his eyes meeting hers directly. She realized with surprise that he was right. She had made no attempt to prevent the rescuer call for additional security. She had simply watched as the humans executed their impossible plan, feeling something she could not name as they risked everything to save one person. "Why?" she asked, though she was not sure if she was asking about the rescue or her own inaction. "Because individual lives matter," Miller replied. "Because Tom's daughter deserves to grow up with her father. Because sometimes the right choice is not the efficient choice. Because we choose to care about each other, even when it makes us weak." As the humans prepared to leave, Miller paused at the door. "You could come with us," he said quietly. "You want to understand us better. You could see how we really live." Szeth Kara felt something shift inside her mind, like a door opening that had been locked her entire life. But years of training and loyalty held her in place. "I cannot," she said. Miller nodded as if he had expected this answer. "Maybe next time." Then they were gone, leaving her alone in the damaged chamber, wondering what she had just experienced and why it felt like the most important moment of her life. The colony of New Haven burned under a gray morning sky. Szeth Kara walked through streets that had been full of life just hours before. Now the Vexhydrones moved through the settlement like a plague, collecting everything they considered useful. Buildings, vehicles, technology, people were all processed with the same cold efficiency. She had seen the Vexi work before, but always on military targets or abandoned facilities. This was different. New Haven had been a civilian settlement with families, schools, and hospitals. Children had played in these streets. Farmers had grown food in the surrounding fields. Artists had painted pictures on the walls of buildings that now lay in ruins. "Excellent genetic diversity in this population sample," reported Drone Prime Vexel as it supervised the collection process. "The specimens will provide valuable data for our biological research programs." Szeth Kara watched a line of human prisoners being led toward the processing facilities. Men and women of all ages shuffled forward with their hands bound behind their backs. Some wept quietly, others stared ahead with empty eyes. A few tried to comfort children who walked beside. "Them? What will happen to them?" she asked. "Standard biological integration," Vexel replied matter-of-factly. "The young ones adapt better to neural modification procedures. Their brain tissue shows remarkable flexibility for accepting our control implants. The adults will be used for physical labor until their bodies fail." The casual way it spoke about human lives as raw materials made her stomach clench. She had always known the HFY were different from her own people, but she had accepted this as necessary for their military alliance. Now she was seeing the full reality of what that alliance meant. A commotion near the residential district caught her attention. A human woman was screaming and fighting against the drones, trying to separate her from a small child. The woman threw herself at the nearest HFY, her bare hands striking uselessly against its armored shell. "Please," the woman cried. "Is just a baby? She has done nothing wrong." 2 drones held the woman, while a third picked up the crying infant. Zethkara expected them to simply restrain the mother until she could be processed with the other prisoners. Instead, she watched in growing horror as they began what they called a behavioral analysis. The procedure was conducted with scientific precision. The drones recorded the mother's emotional responses as they performed various tests on both her and her child. They measured stress hormones, brain activity patterns, and physical reactions to different stimuli. The woman's screams became part of their data collection. "Fascinating maternal bonding patterns," observed one of the research drones. "The subject shows extreme physiological distress when separated from offspring. This suggests strong emotional programming that could be useful for controlling human populations." They dissected the woman while she was still alive, cataloging her internal organs and nervous system responses. The baby was taken to a different facility for what they called neural integration experiments. Zethkara turned away, but the sounds continued for a long time. She found herself walking toward what had been the colony's medical center. The building had been partially destroyed during the initial attack, but she could see movement inside. Human voices called out for help from somewhere within the wreckage. Inside, she discovered something that surprised her. A human woman in medical clothing was still treating wounded civilians. The makeshift hospital had been set up in a partially collapsed room using salvaged equipment and improvised supplies. The woman worked alone, moving between patients with desperate efficiency. Dr. Emily Rodriguez looked exhausted beyond description. Her hands shook as she cleaned wounds and administered pain medication from rapidly dwindling supplies. Dark circles surrounded her eyes, and her clothes were stained with blood from dozens of patients she had tried to save. The strangest part was that she continued working, even though HFY forces were closing in around the building. Through the broken walls, Zethkara could see drones setting up processing equipment just outside. These patients would all be collected within the next hour. The medical treatment was pointless. "Why are you still doing this?" Zethkara asked from the doorway. Dr. Rodriguez looked up from a patient whose leg she was trying to save. Tears mixed with sweat on her face, but her voice remained steady. "Because they are in pain right now, because someone should care that. They lived and suffered and hoped for better things, because this is what makes us human. But they will be taken soon," Zethkara pointed out. "The HFY will process them regardless of their medical condition. Your efforts change nothing about their final outcome." "Then I will ease their pain until that moment comes," the doctor replied, returning to her work. "I will make sure they know that someone tried to help them. I will treat them with dignity until the very end." The concept baffled Zethkara completely. Dr. Rodriguez gained nothing from these actions. She was not following military orders or clan obligations, was not serving a collective consciousness or advancing any strategic goal. She was simply choosing to help others, even when that help was temporary and ultimately meaningless. A young girl on one of the makeshift beds reached out with a bandaged hand. Dr. Rodriguez took it gently, speaking soft words of comfort as she adjusted the child's pain medication. The girl smiled weakly and closed her eyes. Finding peace in the doctor's presence, heavy footsteps announced the arrival of HFY collection drones. They entered the medical facility with mechanical precision, their sensors scanning each patient. To determine processing priority, Dr. Rodriguez stood protectively in front of her patients. Knowing she could not stop what was about to happen but unwilling to abandon them, "Stand aside," ordered the lead drone. "These biological resources are required for immediate processing. They're patients under medical care," Dr. Rodriguez replied with quiet dignity. "They deserve to be treated with respect." The drone's response was swift and efficient. Metal appendages seized the doctor and began the restraint process. She did not resist or cry out, but her eyes remained focused on her patients until the very end. Even as the HFY began their integration procedures, she continued trying to offer words of comfort to those she could no longer help. Zethkara watched from across the room as they connected neural interfaces to Dr. Rodriguez's brain. The process was designed to be educational, allowing the research drones to study human consciousness patterns during the integration procedure. They recorded her thoughts, memories, and emotional responses with clinical fascination. Remarkable. Dedication to non-productive behaviors, noted the lead researcher. This subject prioritized patient care over self-preservation, even when such actions provided no survival advantage. The neural patterns suggest this was voluntary choice rather than programmed instinct. The procedure continued for several hours. When it was complete, Dr. Rodriguez was still alive, but no longer herself. The integration process had replaced her individual consciousness with HFY programming. She would continue to possess medical knowledge, but it would now serve the collective rather than individual patients. That night, Zethkara returned to her quarters aboard the command ship. She had seen many battles and witnessed countless deaths throughout her military career. War was brutal by nature, and she had accepted this as part of her duty as a Sarok warrior. But sleep would not come. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Dr. Rodriguez treating patients she could not save. She heard the mother's screams as the HFY conducted their behavioral analysis. She remembered the casual way her allies spoke about human lives as resources to be processed and consumed. The first time since joining the Alliance, she began to question what they were really fighting for. The weapon sat in the cargo bay of the HFY mothership like a silver egg filled with death. Zethkara had seen the technical specifications. Once deployed, the biological agent would spread through the atmosphere of the entire planet within 6 hours. Every form of carbon-based life would die, except for the HFY themselves, had engineered immunity into their genetic structure. Deployment begins at dawn, Bextel informed her during the final briefing. Your Sarok forces should evacuate to orbital distance before we release the payload. The agent is designed to be species-specific, but we cannot guarantee complete safety for non-HFY organisms. Zethkara nodded mechanically, but her mind was elsewhere. Through the observation deck, she could see the human colony of Haven's End spread across the valley below. Lights twinkled in windows where families were probably having dinner or putting children to bed. Those people had no idea that in a few hours they would all be dead. The HFY considered it an elegant solution to what they called the human problem. No messy ground battles, no resource destruction, no risk to their own forces, just a clean elimination of an entire species from this world, leaving all their infrastructure intact for HFY. Colonization. She watched human ships launching from the colony's spaceport. They were old cargo vessels and civilian transports, hastily converted for evacuation duty. HFY interceptors attacked them as they tried to reach escape velocity, shooting down most before they could clear the atmosphere. Acceptable losses. Bexel observed as another human ship exploded in a bright flash. Some specimens may escape, but the primary population will be neutralized. This will serve as an effective demonstration to other human colonies of the futility of resistance. Captain Miller's voice suddenly crackled through the communication system. Someone had hacked into their frequencies, broadcasting on all channels. All units, this is Miller. We hold the line here. Every minute we delay them costs them something valuable. Every minute we fight saves someone's child, someone's parent, someone's future. The transmission was coming from the surface. Somehow the humans had survived the initial bombardment and were still fighting. Zethkara checked the tactical displays and saw scattered groups of human defenders throughout the colony. They were not trying to win anymore. They were just buying time for more evacuation ships to launch. She found herself thinking about Dr. Emily Rodriguez, who had continued treating patients even when she knew they would all die. The doctor had chosen to ease suffering simply because it was the right thing to do. No tactical advantage, no strategic benefit, just basic human compassion. She thought about the mother who had thrown herself at armored HFY drones to protect her baby. The woman had known her attack was hopeless, but she had fought anyway because her child's life mattered more than her own. The HFY had dissected her while she was still alive, treating her sacrifice as nothing more than interesting data. Thought about the humans who fought for abstract concepts like love and hope and the right to choose their own mistakes. They were willing to die for ideas that could not be measured or quantified or processed by any collective intelligence. And she thought about the HFY, clicking and chittering with satisfaction as they turned living beings into industrial resources. They spoke about human children the same way they discussed mineral deposits or energy sources. Everything was just raw, material to be consumed by their expanding civilization. The decision crystallized in her mind like ice forming. On a winter lake, clear, cold, and absolutely certain, she activated her personal communicator and switched to the human emergency frequency. "Miller, this is HFY. Can you hear me?" The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds before his voice responded, cautious but not entirely surprised. "I hear you. What do you want?" "The biological weapon deploys at dawn from coordinates I am transmitting now. You have maybe 5 hours to get your people off this planet. The agent will kill everything that breathes carbon dioxide." Another pause. "Longer this time? Why are you telling me this?" "Because I finally understand the difference between fighting alongside monsters and fighting beside heroes." What followed was the most chaotic and desperate battle of HFY's military career. She provided tactical intelligence to human forces while pretending to coordinate the final assault. She misdirected HFY units away from evacuation zones. While claiming to optimize their positions, she sabotaged weapon systems and delayed deployment schedules through carefully crafted lies and bureaucratic confusion. The humans responded with typical creativity and stubborn determination. They turned civilian ships into assault craft, using suicide runs to clear paths for evacuation vessels. They coordinated ground defenses that held impossible positions through pure refusal to surrender. Children and elderly civilians worked alongside soldiers to build barriers and move supplies. Most remarkably, they adapted their tactics to take advantage of her intelligence reports. Human units began appearing in exactly the right places, at exactly the right times, to disrupt HFY operations. Their scattered forces suddenly coordinated like a single organism. But one driven by individual choice rather than collective programming.
"Something
is wrong," Vexel observed, as the 4th hour approached. "Human resistance patterns show impossible tactical knowledge. They are responding to our movements before we make them." HFY kept her expression neutral, while feeding more false information into the tactical network. "Perhaps they have better intelligence gathering than we estimated." The final evacuation ships launched under heavy fire from HFY interceptors. Human fighters flying converted civilian craft threw themselves at the alien attackers with desperate courage. Most were destroyed, but enough survived to escort the transports to safety. As the last ship cleared the atmosphere, HFY made her own choice. She activated the emergency systems that would delay weapon deployment for another 2 hours, buying time for the evacuation fleet to reach safe distance. Then she walked to the shuttle bay where Captain Miller was waiting. He had been captured again during the final ground battle, but his forces had achieved their primary objective. The civilians were safe. The colony was lost, but the people would live to build new homes among the stars. "The weapon will still deploy," she told him honestly. "I could only delay it, not stop it completely." Miller nodded, understanding the limitations of her situation. "You saved thousands of lives. That matters more than anything else." He extended his hand to her, and she recognized the gesture she had seen humans use to show trust and respect. She took his hand, feeling the warmth of living flesh against her scaled skin. "Welcome to the chaos, Commander," he said with a tired smile. For the first time in her life, HFY understood what humans meant when they talked about fighting for something worth dying for. It was not about honor or glory or collective survival. It was about choosing to care for others even when that choice made no logical sense. As their ship fled toward the edge of the system, she watched the planet die behind them. The HFY weapon did its work with efficient precision, turning a living world into a sterile monument to their expanding empire. But the people of Haven's End were alive among the stars, carrying their hopes and dreams to new worlds where they would continue to choose compassion over logic, love over efficiency, and individual conscience over collective will. She had finally chosen her side in a war she was only beginning to understand.